it should be there for the first Q&A, so that you can keep time. And the discussion will together after the Q&A. Okay. Yeah. To be honest, I'm just here with consulting. It's a bit happy to you. Okay. Yeah, we'll just communicate. वाहिगुरू जी की फतेह.
I think it's just popped out for a while. It doesn't matter. Anyway, it's our great pleasure, Mr. Bender was going to do it, but it's our great pleasure and honour. Well, is it there again? Okay, so honour, we're very grateful. Amarjit Singh, he's a partner at Ernst & Young and organiser of the Sikh Society there, and his introduction to me was done by a relative of mine, but he then reminded me that his was the second wedding that took place in Gurdwara, so after the new moon. But we're also very grateful, he's going to make the introduction of Professor Arvind-Pal Singh Mandair, who's come over from America and kindly agreed to do this session with us. Thank you.
Welcome everybody. I'm just going to give a quick introduction and then also just talk a little bit about how we see today running, just so that everybody's higher on the hoga. So it's no surprises for everybody. So firstly, we're going to hear from Dr. Mandair, who's going to talk for about 45 minutes. After that, because some of you might have some burning questions, so I'll have, maybe from listening to him, we're going to give like 5-10 minutes of just quick questions. So after that, we're going to have 3 people come up to just have a discussion about what was also gone through, and hopefully they're here. I can see them here, so thank you very much. After they finish, we'll then have 45 minutes, a proper big chunk of time for you to ask away all your questions. So, if you don't, the burning questions, just if anybody's got very quick burning questions as well, which now you have to get it off, then please ask. But please don't worry, because after the discussion, we have 45 minutes, a lot of time to take all your questions and really have a good discussion today. So thank you very much, Dean, for that. Just to quickly give an introduction to the great man we have here. Today we have the privilege of welcoming Dr. Arvind-Pal Singh Mandair, who is a truly remarkable scholar. He's worked with just ancient wisdom and contemporary thought. Dr. Mandair is Professor of Asian Languages and Cultures at the University of Michigan, where he holds the prestigious endowed chair in Sikh Studies. And not only has he held one Sikh study chair, this is actually the second time he's held a Sikh study chair. Previously, he was chair of Sikh Studies at Southall University, so we're very honored to have somebody like him today. What makes Dr. Mandair's journey particularly fascinating is his path from laboratory to library. He began as a chemist before dedicating his life to exploring the profound philosophical traditions of Sikhism. This unique background brings both scientific rigor and spiritual sensitivity to his scholarship. So for the scientists in you, you're in for a treat. Dr. Mandair has authored several influential books, including Sikhism, A Guide for the Perplexed, and his latest work, Sikh Philosophy, exploring Gurdwara concepts in a decolonizing world. This recent book is groundbreaking because it's the first serious philosophical treatment of Sikh thought in Western academia, examining concepts like the nature of reality, consciousness, and ethical living through a Sikh lens. Beyond his writing, Dr. Mandair founded and edits the journal Sikh Formations, which has become the leading academic forum for critical discussions about Sikh culture, religion, and identity. His work constantly challenges us to think beyond Western philosophical frameworks and consider how other wisdom traditions can enrich our understanding of fundamental human questions. With that, Dr. Mandair, I'm looking forward to hear what you have to say for us today. Thank you very much.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you so much to everybody to Singh Sabha Southall Gurdwara for organizing this and for doing this at really breakneck speed. I want to thank Dr. Garcha in particular, also Dr. Rai for proposing that I speak here as well. Dr. Garcha and I were on email for about 3 weeks, and he literally brought this together very, very quickly. So I'm truly grateful, and really grateful to all of you for coming out on a very hot Saturday afternoon to share some thoughts together. So with that, I'm going to start with this Prezi, and I hope that everybody can see the screen. How far does the visibility go? Is it good at the back? Excellent, thank you. So let's take it away. So I'm just trying to balance stuff here for a second. I've got too many things going on. So just give me 1 second. And this is nicely frozen. Okay, so this in front of you is an idea of what I'm going to talk about. We're going to start with this bubble on the left-hand side, why Sikh philosophy, and I'm going to share some aspects of my personal journey just for about 3 or 4 minutes or so, why I got into Sikh philosophy, why even do Sikh philosophy, and we'll come back to that right at the end as well, because not many people in academia, in fact nobody else I think really does Sikh philosophy. For the large part of the lecture, what I'm going to do is mostly mapping. So we're going to map some of the past encounters that have led to the formation of what we understand as Sikh philosophy. And that's a very interesting journey in itself. Largely, it's to do with the encounter of the West, encounter of Sikhi with the West, and also the trajectory of Gurmat in relation to its encounter with the West. But it has a number of phases, and you'll see these terms, MSP1, MSP2, MSP3, which sounds very pharmaceutical, but it really stands for modern Sikh philosophy. So we have modern Sikh philosophy 1, modern Sikh philosophy 2, modern Sikh philosophy 3, and I'm breaking them into 3 phases so that we can understand the way that it's developed over the last 100 years or so. And it's a very interesting journey as well that has interactions and intersections with other forms of Sikh thought. Once we've done most of the mapping, I'm going to ask the question, what is beyond modern Sikh philosophy? Where can it lead? What is Sikh philosophy for a contemporary age, for our particular age? And that's the geopolitical chaos that we're in right now. What does it have to say to that? And again, I'm going to give you some teasers more than lay out in detail. If you want more detail, obviously read the book. And then we'll look at some future orientations, and specifically I want to talk about the relevance of Sikh philosophy to Sikh studies, which a lot of people are familiar with, and not only to Sikh studies, but also to university-community partnerships and how they can move forward. And I know that the history of Sikh studies has not been an easy one, either in North America or even here. But I see hope ahead. And so that's where we're going to go with this. Let me see if I can just get moving. So why Sikh philosophy? And I'm just have an awkward moment while I get this sorted. There we go. So why Sikh philosophy? First of all, there's an easy answer to this, and that has to do with personal predilections. So the easy answer I'm going to give to you is that I've always been interested in Gurmat Vichar, or just simply Vichar. And Vichar, quite simply, is essentially thinking and applying concepts to life, to the world that we live in, and also introspectively to ourselves. So I've been interested in that, and I think the first moment that I knew I'd be interested in this was about the age 10 when I visited India with my dad. I think it was 1973, and we brought home a load of history books, and in that pile of history books there was one book by Dr. Sher Singh called Philosophy of Sikhism. And neither of us, neither my dad nor myself, could understand what the book was about. And I think it took me another 20 years to figure out what he was actually saying. But it had a profound impact on me because as I made my way through it, I realized that he'd set a level of discourse back in the 1930s that we're still trying to achieve today. And I think that that's really important. So there's that. And then in 1984, just after 1984, works like Jasbir Singh Ahluwalia's Sovereignty of the Sikh Doctrine had a big impact on me. And I think the book's publication was timed quite beautifully to coincide with 1984. And then, of course, I'm a very ardent listener to some of the great Gathawachaks, like Giani Sansingh Maskeen, for example. I feel I've literally been tutored in Gurmat Vichar from people like him. And I use Giani Sansingh Maskeen's works to teach my students a certain type of Punjabi as well, the Punjabi that's close to Gurbani, basically. And that's not easy to do. And there are still, those are still things that are being worked out as we speak. So let me just move on. The other big thing that had an impact on me was something that I'm just going to call disorders of identity here. And this is going back to my book, Religion and the Spectre of the West, which was published in 2009. Part of that book, what I was trying to do was to map my own interaction with myself, the world, and I called it disorders of identity. So it's very important, this particular aspect here. The other important aspect was something at the bottom. I don't know if you can see it, but it's in the first chapter. It's something to do with the global fiduciary. And the global fiduciary is an idea that I played around, I borrowed from philosophers such as Jacques Derrida, and brought it into the colonial interaction between Sikhi and the West. So this is just for my sort of first book, but these things had a major impact on me. I'm trying to just move this on a little bit. The other thing I want to say from a personal perspective, I use this word decathexis. What is decathexis all about? That's what's going on in that book, Religion and the Spectre of the West. And this speaks, I think, to the geopolitical chaos that we're in right now. What I've argued in that book is that we colonized cultures have been socialized into a global belief system in the 19th century. And that global belief system turns into a global order. It's that global order that we've been living with and living in for the past 2 centuries. The global order was created largely by Europeans. The British had a large part to play in that. And that global order includes everything from economy to politics to law. Pretty much everything is framed in those kind of terms. That global order has lasted until literally this year, or possibly last year, when the West literally starts dismantling its own global order. So it's a pivotal and very, very important event, which most people perceive as geopolitical chaos, and they can't seem to understand what on earth is happening. And Sikh philosophy, I think, was born at a certain time, in times of geopolitical chaos as well, but I think it has something really important to say to that. Now, this order, this global fiduciary, is essentially, the way I'm mapping it here is that we're seeing the end of Pax Americana, which is the American name for the global order which has existed for the last 80 years or so. What happens after that? It's worth thinking about, and I'm going to suggest in my talk that Sikh philosophy has an important part to play in that, partly because it is a vehicle that was born out of the encounter with the West, and it still has the potential to enter into streams of activity and thought practice that to date we've actually stayed away from, that Sikhs have actually stayed away from. And I'm going to bring up these terms, diasporicity and the cosmopolitical. So for me, it's about mapping what's happening in my own mind as well. The Sikh philosophy that I'm speaking about is literally coming out of my own interaction with the environment that I'm living in. And for me, as a second generation diasporic Sikh, it has to do with the crossing of cultures that second generation, third generation Sikhs live through, and acknowledging that crossing and learning to be at home in that crossing of cultures as well. And so in this period of geopolitical chaos, I think there is still hope. So let's start with the lecture proper and talk about just the mapping. I'm going to map two main periods, pre-modern to modern, and try and connect them. I'm going to make one assertion, which is very important. Gurmat is not the same as Sikh philosophy. Sikh philosophy takes its inspiration from Gurmat, but they're not the same thing. And I would never want them to be the same thing, because Gurmat is the inspiration. It's based on revelation, on revelatory, on Gurbani, and it can never be the same as Sikh philosophy. But Sikh philosophy, nevertheless, is a hugely important vehicle for the contemporary period. And I think it is, you'll see basically what I'm trying to get at here as we go through this. So I'm going to track how Gurmat existed in its own environment for the first couple of hundred years and then shifts into a different environment completely. And that shifting is very important. So let's just look at this diagram for a second. I don't know if anybody at the back can see that. No? Okay. If you can, that's great. I'm going to enlarge this. So what I'm trying to do with this is map how Sikh philosophy comes into being in these periods. So there are two sources of modern Sikh philosophy. One is indigenous, or the local, and the other is Western. And they're ordered by a certain relationship between the particular and the universal, which we'll come back to later. What we're most familiar with is the particular, the one that has to do with Sikh history, etc., etc. And then you see, so the early portions of Gurmat, the way it exists, is as a pre-philosophy. I would call it a proto-philosophy. There's not yet philosophy, properly speaking. That philosophical emergence comes about when you see this sign MSP1, MSP2, and it begins in the 1870s with the rise of the Singh Sabha movement, but actually even before then. And I'm going to put some more slides on to show you what exactly goes on. So let's just look at this in a bit more detail. So this is the first, the two sources of modern Sikhism. So what we're mostly used to is seeing this intricate relationship between the political and the spiritual, and Gurmat ties both of these together. So we're mostly familiar with the martyrdoms of the Sikh gurus, the martyrdoms that went on in the Misl period, the survival of Sikhs in the 18th century, the rise of the Misls, the Khalsa Raj, the Anglo-Sikh wars. What we often leave out is what's happening side by side, which is the development of thinking and exegetical discourse, which Professor Taran Singh of Punjabi University, Patiala, he labeled these movements of exegesis as parnalis. Parnalis literally mean streams of exegetical thought, basically, or streams of exegesis. So you have the Sahaj Pranali, which is something akin to the way that the gurus were interpreting the writings of earlier gurus. And then that is overtaken by the Pai Pranali, which is by Gurdas's exegesis on Gurbani. And then from there, we have other streams of exegesis, like the Udasi, the Nirmala, the Giani Pranali, etc. So we'll come back to this in a moment. The key change happens after 1849, once the Sikh kingdom falls and Sikhs lose political sovereignty. After that, we have the emergence of Anglo-vernacular schools and a new regime of translation. And this is where that the global order comes into play. Remember I mentioned this global order. That is imposing English as a universal language and a regime of translation which puts English at the top. So even when Punjabis thought and wrote in their own native tongue and in their own native language, what we understand as reality has been altered. It's skewed basically so that what counts as most real and what gives reality as grounding is given by Western discourse, even though we're speaking within South Asia or wherever else. So the annexation of Punjab, colonial rule, after that we have the rise of the Singh Sabha Pranali, which technically is a Pranali, but this is the phase out of which modern Sikhism and Sikh philosophy is actually born, and we'll talk about that. And this is where the dialogue with the British and other European scholars is carrying on, from the 1870s to the 1940s. And from this develops what we understand as modern Sikhism with its major structures, the Akali Dal, SGPC, the modern Gurdwara system, and the colleges, the educational colleges, which came into being especially after the 1960s, but they began in the late 19th century as well. And on the other side, because Sikh culture and Punjabi culture, and in fact South Asian culture, is passing through a period of secularization. Again, remember the global order, passing into the global order. You also have the rise of Marxist discourse as well, and its effect on Punjabi culture. And that has existed side by side, especially in Punjab, but also out here in the West as well. So we have essentially modern Sikh identity and a modern Punjabi identity. One tends towards religious nationalism, the other towards a more secular nationalism, if you like. And the two have coexisted uneasily to date, but there's been a major divergence, I think, in the last 20 years or so. And that is also part of the effect of the global order that we live in, the global fiduciary. Okay, let's just go on and talk about the Pranaliya. So I mentioned the Pranaliya. Gurmat discourse is developed over 400 years through these streams of exegesis, which Taran Singh calls Pranaliya. And he wrote this very, very important book, Gurbani Diyan Vyakhya Pranaliya. It's a book that came out in 1980. Was influential for a time, but it gives you a really good roadmap of how these streams of exegesis developed. And to date, I haven't seen a translation of it. And other work was being done by Professor Pyar Singh as well. And we can just go on to the next slide to see how that sort of maps out. So Taran Singh is the one who developed this distinction between the various Pranaliya, mapping Sikh exegesis, Sikh thought processes over a period of about 400 years. Let me just slide that. Sorry, this is more cumbersome than I actually thought it would be. Pyar Singh, on the other hand, is not as detailed in his analysis of the Pranalis, but he does add something really interesting. He adds that we begin with the Sampradaya Pranalis, and then with the Udasis and the Paramath Pranali, the Udasi and the Nirmalas, he labels them as Shastrik or Darshanik Pranalis, which is basically Brahmanical. Essentially, it's a way of categorizing a new influx of thought into the discourse of Gurmat. So Gurmat comes out of the discourse of Guru Nanak, arguably before that as well, and it has a rhythm of its own which keeps some loose sense of identity together for the Panth. And then the Shastrik Pranalis introduce a different rhythm, something that in my earlier book I called the Vedic economy. Essentially, in the absence of Khalsa Raj, if you like, in the Misl period especially, you have the influx of Brahmanical paradigms taking over, especially Advaita Vedanta and stuff. And the last Pranali, Pyar Singh labels as Adunik, or basically modern encounters, basically modernity. And he labels the Nirmala, Giani, and the Singh Sabha Pranali as essentially modern, which is absolutely true because they, even the Nirmala Pranalis are intersecting with the early part of the colonial period. But his focus is largely on the Singh Sabha Pranali, and essentially Singh Sabha Pranali has come to define what Sikh modernism actually is. And so we're going to focus mostly on that, and that's where modern Sikh philosophy is born. So just to keep this mapping going, MSP1, Modern Sikh Philosophy. This is an image of by Dr. Bhaijot Singh, one of the most influential of the Singh Sabha exegetes, the writers, the scholars, and activists who created the Singh Sabha and created its corpus of literature. And he wrote one of the most influential books that, in my opinion, lays the basis of modern Sikh philosophy, which is Gurmat Nirnay. So what's the activity like that gives rise to modern Sikh philosophy? Well, that activity, as I mentioned earlier, takes place in a 50-year period from the 1870s to the 1920s. It takes 50 years for the Singh Sabha to battle with attacks by the Arya Samaj, with the Sanatan Dharmis, and also with British Indologists as well, Orientalists, who were pulling the discourse of Gurmat in one way or another. And we see this in the extensive tracts and newspaper articles, the Khalsa Akhbar, Gurmukhi Akhbar. These were papers produced by the early Singh Sabha writers. And then new commentaries arising as a result of this kind of encounter, beginning with Farid Kotika, and then works by Giani Ditt Singh, by Garn Singh Nabha. What I want to focus on is actually that it's in the 1920s that the early struggles come to a head and are converted into, major exegetical works, major volumes, basically. So Gurmat Sudhakar, Gurmat Prabhakar, by Veer Singh's exegetical works, Santhya Sri Guru Granth Sahib, lots of different Santhyas were produced at this time. Of those, the one that I'm going to pick out is Jodh Singh's Gurmat Nirnay, which was published in 1932, and in a sense creates the essence of early Sikh philosophy, early modern Sikh philosophy, by bringing together some of the key concepts of Gurmat and then laying them out in a very important way. So Gurmat Nirnay is a seminal work. I regard it as the culmination of MSP 1, Modern Sikh Philosophy 1. It lays the groundwork for the next two phases, Modern Sikh Philosophy 2, Modern Sikh Philosophy 3. It also is very influential for the next phase of work, which is the production of English language philosophies of Sikhism. Prior to that, most of the work had been done in Punjabi, right? After the 1930s, I think after Sher Singh's work, we start seeing a whole new range of works in English language as well. What he does most beautifully, though, is to systematically map the key concepts of Gurmat and to lay them out and to give us not just definitions, but really interesting interpretations, some of which I think are still need to be tapped into today. So his summary of Ikonkar, of the nature of Satguru and Guru, the nature of the word, of Naam and Anhad Shabad, etc., laid out very, very nicely in a systematic chapter form, ending with a chapter on the Khalsa. And what he's essentially doing is, in a sense, translating it into an idiom that would have been fluently understood at the time, so that people could see what Gurmat is and take it away at a glance. It's the first kind of short encyclopedia of Sikh philosophy, without the word Sikh philosophy actually being there. So this is the effect of the early Singh Sabha work. What happens is that the word Gurmat, or the term Gurmat, which is the critical, is the axial term that binds Sikh life world together, as well as its thought processes, etc. It passes through essentially secular thought. There's a secular process of secularization and nationalization going on. And the passage, it's reframed in historical time. And what we have then is the bifurcation of Gurmat into two different discourses. There's one set of discourses where Gurmat is primarily translated as religion, and that results in works mostly dedicated to Sikh theology. And then there is another set of works that are where Gurmat is translated more as philosophy, and this is the beginnings of what we understand as philosophy of Sikhism. And they're pointing in two different directions. One is towards world religions, and the other is towards world philosophy. So these were the two areas of academia, in the way that academia was mapping these different cultures. But what remains the same in the Singh Sabha discourse is the sovereignty of concepts. And what they do is they basically tease out the main concepts and define them in a sovereign kind of fashion. And what I'm going to talk about later is how we shift towards a diasporic kind of interpretation of these concepts, because this was all done in a period of rising nationalism and nationalist discourse, especially culminating in the 1920s, 100 years ago, when the feeling in the world was pretty much the same as it is now, with nations, defining themselves against each other, pitting themselves at each other, and then we see the First World War and the Second World War. We seem to be in a similar period right now, with this return to extreme nationalism, etc., etc. So the question before us is, what do we do? Do we repeat the same, or do we change the patterns of thinking? So Gurmat Nirnay, I think this was the last one, and I'm just trying to get off this one here. Excuse me while I just move off. Okay, MSP2. Modern Sikh philosophy 2, in my opinion, begins with Dr. Sher Singh's philosophy of Sikhism. And I picked this book out as definitive of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, especially in the discourse of Gurmat. This is interesting because this was a PhD thesis done not in Punjab, but at the University of London. So he was one of the first Sikh scholars to come out, study at the University of London, SOAS specifically, and end up with this thesis. Another fact that's interesting, this was published in 1944, but the actual work was done in the late 1930s. Okay, so that's when he was actually doing his dissertation. He was dissatisfied with the idiom in which he wrote this work, and less than 9 years later, he translates his own work into another book called Gurmat Darshan. And I've read both. They're almost exactly the same, but there's a definite inflection there, that he's trying to be more at home in one rather than the other. But for me, Sher Singh is interesting for a different set of reasons. Not just that he wrote Philosophy of Sikhism and really inaugurates Sikh philosophy for the first time. It's the fact that he was one of the first diasporic Sikhs doing this. And at the same time that he's writing this work, he's also reflecting on what's going on in his own mind. How the European concepts are coming into play with Punjabi concepts. And I pulled out these two quotes from his preface, and I'll just read them for people who can't see them at the back. What justifies the use of philosophy in the title of my work is the angle, the viewpoint from which I have approached Sikhism. This new perspective is based, he says, on a rational conviction, impassionate criticism, he uses, which alone can succeed in exercising a rational check on biased opinions issuing from the fact of my being a Sikh by birth. What's he doing here? He's basically, this is a secular apology. He's apologizing, well, it's a secular apologetic. Basically, he's aware that we're working within a secular framework and we have to stick to certain rules to do this. But what's interesting is that although he goes through the secular process, right at the end of the book, he reverts back into pure Gurmat mode. It's really, really interesting, and I can't bring that out here, but maybe in the Q&A I can talk a little bit more about that. Another thing that I found in the preface that's really interesting, and I compared the Punjabi version to the English version as well, and they're slightly different, but they're saying the same thing. He issues an apology. He says it's an apology for indulging in comparisons between concepts held by Guru Nanak and those held by Western thinkers. He says he wanted to avoid doing this, but he did so in the hope that such a comparison may render the Eastern concept more intelligible to the Western and to non-Sikh readers. So he's trying to reach out to a non-Sikh audience specifically. That's his whole sort of aim. And that's what I find really interesting. But what he's doing and saying in this quote is he's looking into his own mind and seeing how these concepts stand together. And clearly there is a discrepancy, a power discrepancy in the way that these concepts are treated. But they're in his mind, and he is a Sikh by birth. So how does he handle it? This is very interesting. And I'm going to come back to this in a second, because it's crucial to what we do today. So what has Sher Singh done? He's basically brought Sikh philosophy into the comparative arena, meaning that if you're going to exist in this global order, you have to imbibe what we understand as comparative processes. There's no way that you can just articulate Sikh concepts, Punjabi concepts, Indian concepts. They're given relevance in relation to Western concepts. That's the work of global linguistic and conceptual hegemony. That's how colonialism works, basically. There's an unconscious that's at work in the comparative process as well. So let's just go past Sher Singh, whose work was very influential with the Shromani Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee for the first 20 years or so. And from what I understand, he may have been deeply involved in their educational work as well. That's something I'm trying to follow up a little bit more. MSP3 really begins in the late 1960s. This is a time we normally like to see as the Green Revolution, when Punjab is 20 years or so past the partition period and is beginning to consolidate its newfound sort of resurgence, if you like. And the key event of that period is the 500th birth anniversary of Guru Nanak. Now, I think MSP3 1969 is important because it brings to a close, or it brings to a culmination, 100 years of Singh Sabha activity. And in fact, you can see all of that activity really come to fruition in the work of the scholars of the 1960s and 70s and the 80s. And it was a time of optimism and outreach, and there were numerous conferences going on at Punjab University Patiala, Guru Nanak University, and also at SOAS as well. And I'll just put them side by side. What these scholars did in the 60s was actually to bring Gurmat into the arena of the modern humanities. So they made it legible and, you know, give it out to the rest of the world in a way that hadn't been done before. And that was all mostly being done from Punjab. So here, what I'm doing is showing how MSP 3, or Modern Sikh Philosophy 3, what's the output, the publication output in Punjab compared to the West. In Punjab, mainly from these two universities as well as from others as well, you see new journals emerge around about 1969. Journal of Sikh Studies, Journal of Religious Studies, Punjab Past and Present. The Encyclopedia of Sikhism project emerges at this time. So a lot of activity. People are really putting their effort into all of this work. The fields that they're covering are history, comparative religion, and a ton of work in philosophy. I've counted well over 100 books in Punjabi and in English on philosophy alone. And there's a reason why they were really putting their eggs into the philosophy basket at the time. Then when you look at the production in the West after 1969, 1969 is also arguably the period when modern Sikh studies comes into being in Europe and also in North America. At the School of Oriental and African Studies, we see several books coming out. Guru Nanak and the Sikh Religion by Hugh MacLeod, Guru Nanak in Sikh History, Guru Nanak Glossary, Sacred Language of the Sikhs by Christopher Shackle. So the fields that are developed from the 1960s onwards are history, history of religion, linguistics, socioanthropology, no philosophy. Nobody will touch philosophy. Nobody will touch theology. Why is that? That's the first thing that I noticed when I was switching fields and I wanted to study Sikh philosophy or Sikh theology, and I don't care which one of the two it was. And I went to supervisor after supervisor, and they basically said, we don't do that. If you want to do anthropology, that's fine. If you want to do history, that's fine. But we don't touch that. It's mostly ideology. So it was kind of labeled as ideology, as already kind of biased stuff. So, you know, there is something working there. And, you know, one of the things I've done in Religion in the Spectrum of the West was to try and just change the playing field a little bit so that Sikh philosophy, theology emerges as something that we could think about again, you know. MSP3, these are some of the great books that came out. I won't go through all of them, but some of them are probably familiar to you. Some very important names, ending with Gurpagath Singh, who was a teacher of literature and philosophy at Punjab University Patiala, and a whole list of other names who are publishing books in Sikh philosophy. So Gurnam Kaur, Reason and Revelation in Sikhism, Nirpay Singh, Philosophy of Sikhism, that's a follow-up to Sher Singh's work. Himmat Singh's Shabd Philosophy. This is actually one of the most important books and the most underrated books that I have ever come across in the English language. The English in which it's written is awful, but what he's saying is absolutely stunning. It's amazing. And he's trying to put the philosophy of Shabd in a kind of a central position. But it's a hard task. And, you know, I advise people to at least have a look at it because it's really, really interesting. And I'm beginning to use that as well. I've almost finished with MSP3. And forgive me, it's hard going with this thing. This is where I wanted to go, just before this. So let's just finish with some of the key works in MSP3, Philosophy of Sikhism by Sher Singh, Avtar Singh's Ethics of Sikhism, Reason and Revelation. What I'm trying to get at here is that although there is this great resurgence of interest in Sikh philosophy and theology, it's still working largely within Kantian, Hegelian sort of frameworks, the European philosophical frameworks, and consciously so. So even somebody like Harinder Singh Mehboob, who wrote Sejje Racho Khalsa, you can see behind the main narrative, the framework is still taken from Hegel, right? Why is that? It's largely that reason I gave earlier, that you have to work within that global framework, that global order, and the way that conceptuality works there. So nobody is immune to that. The question is, what do you do with it, right? That's the important thing. And can you work your way out of it, against it, without sacrificing Sikh subjectivity or Gurmat completely altogether? This is where that divergence between the Marxist strand and the Gurmat strand really comes out. What the Marxists did was essentially say, well, we're going to stay within the secular realm. This is all theology. We don't want to go there. And the two sides have completely diverged to the detriment of, I think, of Sikh education in the 20th century. And again, that's something we can talk about a little bit more. So what are the limitations of modern Sikh philosophy? I've spent a while just trying to map this. The main limitation is that it's subject to a racialized, religious, comparative imaginary of the West, what I've been calling that global fiducia, or the global order. All of the discourses since the encounter with the West have worked within this racialized, religious, comparative framework. So they're all tainted with a certain methodological nationalism. So nationalism is kind of underpinning, ethno-nationalism is kind of underpinning how each version of Sikh thought is expressed. And what this does is that it completely delimits its potential. Fine, it creates walls and it creates boundaries, but those boundaries can also strangle a discourse as well. They can stop you from interacting with the outside world, and that becomes a problem. And I'm going to go back to Sher Singh in a minute because he detects this as well, but in a weird kind of way. This is the framework in a very simplistic fashion. If I had to draw it out, what was that global order? This was the sense of the world as Hegel had kind of narrated it in his lectures on the history of philosophy, lectures on the philosophy of history, etc., etc. And Hegel brings the idea of a world, a modern world, together for the first time. And it's really important, where he puts third world, what we used to call third world cultures, Africa, China, India, right at the start of history, and then history moves from one side and ends with the with Christianity, but also with secularization right at the end. And I put secularization and Christianity together because it's pretty much the same thing, right? And what he's doing is mapping race, culture, psychology, philosophy, concepts, everything. He's putting it all onto this map. And he says, this is how the world works. Take it or leave it, basically. And of course, they could say that from the vantage point of colonial power. Okay. Let me go back to that 1 second and just move towards what Sher Singh was saying. Now, Sher Singh detects this in an interesting way. And he writes, this is towards the end of the book, Philosophy of Sikhism. He's basically acknowledging the framework he's working in. And he says both Aryan and Semitic mind pass through this process to reach the unity of God. So he's trying to place Gurmat within this kind of racialized schema and saying that we belong here, basically. And just to read the next two, be interesting. But polytheism, monotheism, monism, pantheism, apart from being chronological stages in the religious ideology of man, also represent successive phases of the mental development of an individual as far as the development of his concept of God is concerned. Let me translate that. Basically, if you have a monotheistic concept of God, it correlates with an Aryan racial spirit, basically. And if you go towards pantheism and polytheism, etc., they're un-Aryan, they kind of correspond to non-Aryan cultures. And so there's a lack of development of ego on one side, there's a full development of ego on the other. And it's basically just a way of saying who's in rule. It's a master-slave kind of statement. And the last statement that Sgss Singh makes is, moreover, men of different levels of intelligence need different concepts of God. I haven't brought it out in the detail that I wanted, but it's clear that Sgss Singh is also playing into this framework as well, trying to work his way out, but at that time unable to do so. So having said that, it's still a phenomenal work given the constraints that he faced. So let's go on and talk about going beyond modern Sikh philosophy. So I've told you what the limitations are. The limitations are that it's working still within that old global order. We are now positioned to move into a new global order. It's being fashioned as we speak. Where it's going to go, I have no idea, right? Your guess is as good as mine. But the process has begun and it's irreversible. It's not going to go back to the same thing. Whoever ends up in the White House in 4 years' time, etc., things are moving in a different direction. So we need to kind of think in more creative and productive ways than we have done before. And I'm gonna make a pitch towards recovering Sikh philosophy's transformative potential. In other words, its potential to transform self, which is, I think, the key, which is what Gurmat is all about. It's at the end of the day, this was not a discourse about just the nature of God. Of course it is. But it's also about the change of humanity and shifting human consciousness from one aspect to a completely different aspect. And we completely forget that. And it's done better, I think, in the Sikh sources than almost anywhere else. I think the whole movement from Manmukh to Gurmukh is it's so powerful throughout Gurbani that you just can't miss it. So I want to focus on bringing the external aspects of Sikh philosophy into harmony with the internal. And by the internal, meaning that Sikh philosophy has the potential to explore one's mind, one's self, one's soul in a way that hasn't done before. And despite the fact that it was born out of an encounter between the West and the East, it actually is in a better position to think about entering into a new global order, or at least positioning Sikh discourse. So I'm going to talk about new planes of encounter, the internal pluralism of Gurmat, and how to bridge the modern and the pre-modern and move to something else. And a better way of putting this is on this slide here. What I think Sikh philosophy does best, and I've been trying to articulate this for 3 decades now, is that it already encompasses the shift away from modernity towards something that might be called transmodernity. Transmodernity is not getting over the modern, it's not the postmodern, etc. It's being aware of where we are, but being able to counter it as well. And so being able to change the nature of modernity, of Western philosophy, of Western thinking, and of the global order. And that's what we never give ourselves credit for because we think we're so small, we can't make a difference. I disagree. I disagree completely. So all of this is mapped out in the Guru Granth Sahib. So you see these, so if we map modernity as consisting of nationalized identitarian schemas and this idea of the liberal autonomous self, the idea of the personal being center, that accords to what Guru Nanak would call Manmukh consciousness, right? It's a restricted or a contracted form of sovereignty. And it's based in a theory of time or an ontology that is Kal-centric. In other words, within linear historical time, which is exactly what is being challenged in the Guru Granth Sahib. But it's lauded in the global order that we've lived in for the last 2,000 years. And that global order always produces an oppositional standpoint, a dualistic standpoint, whether we look at it from ethno-religious nationalism or from secular atheism. Neither of them can get beyond that dualistic standpoint. If you look at what's happening in the Sikh sources and more broadly, I think, in other Asian traditions as well, what you have is the possibility of rediscovering a heteronomous self, basically a relational self. And it's loud and clear in the primary sources of Sikh scripture, etc., etc. We don't have a focus on the personal, but more focus on transpersonal. And the transpersonal is basically the idea of a Gurmukh consciousness. Unfortunately, what we've done with the notion of Gurmukh is to simply say that he, she, or it is a Gurmukh, right? We apply it to ourselves. It's something that is in the process of becoming. And you cannot just define yourself as a Gurmukh, etc. It's something beyond that. So it's actually a mode of consciousness which we have to attain. And that's very important. It's more in tune with what I would call Akal centrism or Hukum centrism. And this results in a non-oppositional standpoint. And if you read Gurbani and other sources as well, that non-oppositional standpoint, no friend, no enemy, right, is crucial. So why aren't we building entire thought processes based on that? And why isn't it being exported out into the humanities or into other cultures? I have in the book, you'll see short readings from the Rag Maru hymn, where I tease a lot of this out, and also from Sgss as well. Again, too much to say here. So I'm coming towards the end now. Why Sikh philosophy now? Why should we even consider this when there's other forms? A lot of people just focus on history or anthropology or whatever. I'm going to pitch a few reasons. First of all, geopolitical chaos and the precarity of the Panth. We're in a period of renewed and very dangerous Occidentalism. Basically, this is not just some forms of nationalism. This is a full-fledged effort to turn the clock back to the colonial period. Again, where it will go, I don't know. And then, and that's happening outside of India. And then in India, you have the problem of Hindutva and the relationship with the Sikhs and also the West. Access to the knowledge system is absolutely crucial. How you access it is even more crucial, right? So these things are all very, very important. Diasporic realism. How do we answer this question? Where exactly is home? Even for Sikhs in Punjab, what is home? Okay, and I'm asking that as a question. I'm not going to get into a debate on this. This is an entire topic for a conference or something like that. What if we were to think about learning to dwell and think between different cultures? because that's the essence that I see in the primary sources of Sikh scripture. I think Guru Nanak's entire emphasis comes from living, thinking between multiple cultures all at one time, right? I'm going to miss this next bullet point out and go towards self-exploration. Sikh philosophy, I think, provides a really good portal for exploring the self in a way that other disciplines and fields do not. We need to allow younger generations to experiment with concepts rather than just guarding them and saying, you know, we can't do anything with them, we just have to matha tek and that lot. No. It's, we're in a different world. We actually need conceptual experimentation that corresponds to the kind of world we're living in. And then there's the question of sovereignty. How do we think about that when we accept that home is not necessarily in Punjab, right? Where is home? And what do you do with the concept of sovereignty in that process? So what can Sikh philosophy do? I'm going to go through these quickly. I know how hot it is in here. Epistemic empowerment. It will put Sikh concepts on steroids, basically, and allow them to enter into the humanities and other discourses on their own terms, right? Remember that word, that phrase, on their own terms. I'll explain that in the Q&A if somebody comes back to me about that. Very importantly for me, Sikh philosophy provides a vehicle or a portal for subjectivity. It's never separate from a rethinking of the Sikh self, right? It's very, very important. It allows you to refigure the selfhood through journeys of self-realization. And the most important thing, it mobilizes Gurmat concepts beyond their ethnic and historical origins. This is one of the big problems I find with Punjabi discourses, is that they never get out of the ethnic or the historical and launch into a different frame. And that's what I'm trying to encourage. And the last thing is in intervention and connectivity. I think Sikh philosophy can be poised beautifully to make connections politically, spiritually, and in every other way. So what can Sikh philosophy do to impact Sikh studies, which is the field that I've been sort of working in? And I'm going to focus on two things: Sikh studies and the critical humanities, and university community partnerships. And I'll do it, I promise, in about 2 or 3 minutes. It can make a really important intervention in the way that the humanities work. In the modern university, and the blueprint for the modern university was created by people like Hegel, Humboldt, etc., Western philosophers. And that the way that they structure knowledge has continued down to us to this time. Again, in an era of geopolitical chaos, the knowledge system is not immune. It's up for grabs, right? And I'm not saying that, for people to be, what's the word I'm looking for? To just go out and do what they want. But it literally is up for experimentation. We can actually do something really interesting with it. But this is the way it's been, modern knowledge has been focused. It's been divided into 2 areas, humanitas and anthropos. These represent the 2 tendencies within the critical humanities. So humanitas represents ideas, the production of ideas, the production of concepts. And these have largely been in the hands of Western philosophers and also theorists, basically. But largely, Western theory has driven what the humanitas is and its relationship to the other side of the humanities, which is the anthropos, which is those disciplines in the humanities that produce empirical data about other cultures or one's own culture, etc. So this, what's operating between them is a relationship between the universal and the particular, but it's a colonial relationship and it's debilitating. And one of the things I'm trying to do is to get people to understand that through Sikh philosophy, you have a direct link into where concepts are made and how they're positioned as well. And you can see from the Anthropos, if I just lift this up a bit, where Sikh studies actually is. So disciplines such as anthropology, history, sociology, religion, literature are still divided into West and non-West. That distinction still operates. And then in the non-West, you have South Asian studies, East Asian studies, etc., etc. So what modern knowledge, modern Western knowledge has done is to create a kind of a prison system, if you like. Somebody can give me a better word, where you know, you have the Eastern knowledges on one side, a museum. Oh, museums are prisons, basically. But you know, where knowledge is demarcated and boundarified, and you're not allowed to move between the two. And you can see where Sikh studies is. It's a part of South Asian studies within this current thing. What I'm trying to do is to jump all the way to here. And to a large extent, I've been successful, and I think that more people are beginning to wake up to that call. Within Anthropos, within these disciplines, the only way you can change the system is by becoming theoretically adept. But theory has largely been secular theory. It has not included, it never includes the concepts of other cultures. And so we can change that relationship. I'm going to skip this because I think I've said it all. So I think there needs to be a different relationship between philosophy and Sikh studies. Sikh studies can be completely different. This is my last slide. In summer of 2025, I'm doing a residential masterclass, which trains students and professionals how to operationalize and apply Sikh concepts to the wider world. It's basically a 5-week online course with a 1-week residential in-person seminar. And this is part of the strategy that I'm using to bring Gurdwaras and the university into a closer relationship. I know there's been a fraught relationship over the past 40 or 50 years. Part of that is, you know, these are growing pains, as one of my colleagues constantly reminds me. These are growing pains. And I think from where I stand, I think Sikhs have never really understood secularism, either to combat secularism or to use its potential in a positive way. They've just cordoned themselves off into one particular area, and so it becomes a battle. And this is why many promising Sikh thinkers left the Sikh fold and became Marxists, basically, or joined, you know, the left. Now, I'm not saying that didn't need to happen, and there could have been a very productive relationship between the two, but it became oppositional, you know, because I think, you know, the way that the Sikh institutions have worked is largely to use a dualistic standpoint. You know, you're either with us or you're against us, and you need something a little bit more sophisticated than that. So I'm going to leave it there because I'm sweating like crazy. So thank you very much for listening. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Everybody, you're just going to have a quick 2-minute break at the minute, just because to give people a water break and just open up some doors. Then we'll come back to the questions and the discussion points.
Can I just ask people just to be seated, because we'll bring the walk around, because if we start going for everybody, can I get some civilized on the water to come around the front, and we're going to open the doors of the panel just for 2 minutes. There are some toilets over here as well, so quickly get yourselves, so we'll get the water around. So can you boys and others please spread the water around? And Mondi,
Thank you.
बस हो गई
For your time, for your question.
या वही सा
Don't need that. ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਫਿਲਾਸਫੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ
ਹਾਂਜੀ।
ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਬੇਸਡ
हाँ जी
ਮੈਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਚਿਰ ਸਿੱਖ ਤੋਂ।
अच्छा जी
ਮੈਂ PhD ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੇ I've been making up a dictionary of quotations of the Guru Granth Sahib,
right
compiling it,
okay
and I've reached 1740 pages.
right
I've put quotations, 50 quotations on one subject and then no subject and so on. ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਨਾ ਮੇਰੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਨਸਰਸ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਸੀ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ even after doing PhD ਮੇਰੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਨਸਰ ਨਹੀਂ
हाँ जी
ਉਹਦਾ ਜਵਾਬ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਫਿਰ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਆਨਸਰਸ ਤਾਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ 'ਚੋਂ ਹੀ ਆਉਣੇ ਆ
हाँ जी
ਸੋ ਮੈਂ ਉਹ ਕੰਪਾਈਲ ਕਰਨ ਲੱਗ ਪਿਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਨਾ ਜਦੋਂ when you get 50 quotations on one subject then you know something is right. ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਦੀ ਫਿਲਾਸਫੀ ਇਹ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਸਾਰੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਇਜ਼ ਐਵਰੀਥਿੰਗ ਉਹੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਜੈਕਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ
हाँ सही गल
ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਾ we have a standard syllabus
या
ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸੰਸਥਾਵਾਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਨਾ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਬਲੇਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦਾ ਮੈਂ ਨਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਦਾ ਨਾਮ ਲੈਣਾ
ਐਕਸਕਿਊਜ਼ ਮੀ ਇੱਕ ਮਿੰਟ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵਰਡ ਲੱਭ ਰਹੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਵਰਡ ਲੱਭ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ ਨਾ
हाँ
ਸਾਈਲੋਸ
साइलोस कहना सका मैं गर्मी च ना पता नहीं लगता
ਸੈਗਰੀਗੇਟਡ ਸਾਈਲੋਸ
या
ਅੱਛਾ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ
सही
ਨਾ
गल जी
ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸੰਸਥਾਵਾਂ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਦੇ ਹੈਵ ਦਾ ਸੈਟ ਸਿਲੇਬਸ ਉਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਿਲੇਬਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਫਿਕਸ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੜ੍ਹਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਐਂਡ ਸੈਂਡ them ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰਕ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਭੇਜ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਾ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਨਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਡਿਸਕਸ਼ਨ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਇਹ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਚਿਰ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਦੇ ਨਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲੇਗਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਜੇ ਉਹ ਟਾਈਮ ਲੈਣਗੇ ਨਾ 5 ਮਿੰਟ
या
ਉਹ ਮੈਕਸਿਮਮ 10 ਮਿੰਟ ਮੈਂ ਬਜਾ ਕੇ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਸਮਝਾ ਦੂੰਗਾ
पर एक वर्ड ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਮਰਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਸਟੈਂਡਰਡਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਉਹ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਉਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ
ਸਟੈਂਡਰਡਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਇਸ ਵੇਸਟਿੰਗ ਆ ਟਾਈਮ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਨਸੈਪਟ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਨਾ ਉਹ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਦੇ ਕਨਸੈਪਟ ਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਜੈਕਟ ਕੀਤੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੈਵਨ ਐਂਡ ਹੈਲ ਇਜ਼ ਨੋਟ ਏ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਕਨਸੈਪਟ
ਨੋ
ਇਹ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਆਪਣੀ ਲਾਈਫ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਸਾਡਾ ਕਨਸੈਪਟ ਆ ਆਦ ਕਰਕੇ ਕਿ ਚਲਾਤੇ ਦਿਖਾਇਆ ਜੈ ਦੇਖਾਂ ਤੇ ਸੋਈ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਦੇਵ ਜੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਨੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਤੋਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਸਾਰੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਖਦਾ ਰਿਹਾ
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ
ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਭਾਈ ਲੈਣਾ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ 8-9 ਸਾਲ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਸਿਖਾਈ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਿਧਾਂਤ ਸਿਖਾਏ ਗੁਰੂ ਅੰਗਦ ਦੇਵ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਕਹਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਅਮਰਦਾਸ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਸਿਖਾਏ ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵਰਕਆਊਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਨਾ ਬਿਗਿਨਿੰਗ ਆਫ ਦ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸ
ਆਪਾਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਚ ਕਰੀਏ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਆਨਸਰ ਕਰਨਾ
ਨਹੀਂ ਮੈਂ ਸਿੰਪਲ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਖਤਮ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਇੰਪੈਕਟ ਕਰਦੀ ਆ
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ
ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ
ਬਿਲकुल
ਇਹ
वही
ਸੰਸਾਰ ਤੋਂ ਦੇ ਦੇ
हाँ।
ਇਹ ਹਰ का रूप है जो दिसे सो तेरा रूप
We
जो
have to kick off now so that we can start.
ਯਾ ਸੌਰੀ ਬਾਅਦ ਚ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂਜੀ ਇਹ ਲਿਆਂਦੀਆਂ ਕਾਰ ਚ ਪਈਆਂ ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ
I would like to get a copy, okay?
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਹਾਂਜੀ
Keep a copy and get a copy for me.
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਪ੍ਰਣਾਲੀਆਂ ਵਾਲੀ
ਉਹ
ਕਿਤਾਬ ਸੀ ਨਾ,
ਕਿਤਾਬਾਂ ਕਾਰ 'ਚ ਪਈਆਂ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ
ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿ ਦਿੰਦਾ who do you want to send?
my daughter I think
Okay.
she Sukhmani, can you and Varun go and get the books? Can you get because they need them. There's one box and then there's a bag. Sorry, Benji.
Box in the bag.
Yeah, with 2 books. Bring them here. Where's my coat? Oh, is that mine?
Just do me one favor, please.
Hanji.
When you're passing the mic, I do have another one, but could you pass that as well, please? Just
So the 3 people now
yeah,
speaking.
if that's possible.
Okay. Well, do you want to take that off then? Because it's going to go to the 3 people now.
Just pass it along with you. It has a magnet on it. Maybe we can connect it to the mic. Just clip.
Shall I just get them to clip it on or what?
Yeah, universally.
Oh, you need to stick it to that mic.
Yeah, is that
I can do
possible?
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Or maybe you can clip it to yeah. Can we just do that? Shove it into there.
Yep. I've got you. Might be able to. Let me wait until he comes back. Fingers crossed. You've lost control. I didn't know there was that. Like, who was out? I don't know. I mean, like, seriously. I think it's the same with that. I mean, like, no. It was not a good idea. You're gone. You lost the audience. I can't believe you're 10 years older than me. Lovely. Hello. Hi, everybody. Can we please try to, even if you want to get your pakode, can we please try to keep the noise down so then we can kick off? Please. Yeah, thank you, too. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, we're going to just do a quick 5 minutes. As we said, if anybody has any sort of very quick dying questions they wanted to ask before we get 3 people coming up. We've got a question over there from the gentleman. Actually, you take this one because it's got the...
Okay.
Go ahead, sir. Thank you very much. I want to bring my question down to the diasporic realism procedure of Ghana.
Hanji.
Politically think, what an add question is that? And that question is the next generation of new generation of Gianis and Gurdwara teachers. This is an excellent atmosphere to answer that question.
Right.
I want to know, in these times, and based on what you have said, bringing the study of Gurdwara to modern times, what are the biggest obstacles to get the youngsters into becoming Gianis and Gurdwara teachers, so that they can bring the reality and realism of Gurdwara forward?
I'm not sure I can outline all of the obstacles. There are just too many. But it's largely, I think, the mentality of leadership has to be in consonance with the creative work that's been done in educational institutions. I think unless you have that tie-up, you won't get anywhere. The biggest obstacle to youngsters, why youngsters are not interested, I think, is simply because the discourse that's put out there is just boring, right? And it's not relevant to their lives and to, answering more profound questions, basically. If you look at Judaism, Christianity, there are centuries-old institutions, theological institutions, philosophical institutions that have created excellent teachers who are both based in seminaries and in institutions and in universities. I think that needs to be replicated, and it needs to be replicated wholesale, done in a different way. You don't have to copy that, but I think until that process begins, you are not going to get the young people engaged, because you can't engage their minds at the moment. A lot of them are just turned off. I teach, when I teach my Sikh studies or Sikh philosophy class, one of the biggest obstacles is convincing the students to take my class, because it won't be a Khalsa camp all over again. I think the Khalsa camps need to be rethought completely, right? And to do that rethinking, you need teachers who are really well trained and who themselves are facing the issues that the younger generations are facing. They are multiple now. What it was when we were younger is nothing compared to what younger people today are facing. This is a whole digitized environment. What we understand as technology, the whole digital world is now part and parcel of the way we make ourselves. It's not separate from that. We have to think in a completely different world. So we have decades to catch up on. So the obstacles are huge. It's largely a question of leadership, but I think we have to also be very, very clear about making it a diasporic project. That it has to be done out here. It has to be done in relation to the institutions that are already there, and that can empower this kind of thing, right? Sorry, that's a very short answer.
The challenge we have is we've got, okay, one more quick question, because please be quick with the answer, because we're not really out of time. Sorry, one more question. One over there.
Thanks a lot. Could you explain us, you said Sikhs have not learned to become secular. I think there are various examples which come to my mind, but maybe you can explain it much better since partition, when I see the big turning point. So when we get divided and the exposure becomes so less. So
Yeah.
could you just maybe start it out?
That's a good question. No, and I may have misspoken. I didn't mean to say that Sikhs should become secular or they fail to become. That's not my issue. They fail to understand how secularism works. That's a whole different question. And the nuances of the relationship between religion and the secular. And I think that, again, should have been done in Punjabi institutions, also should have been done out here as well. We're beginning to see that happen, but it's in very small scale avenue. So it's understanding the nature of secularism, etc., etc. Now, and I'll finish very, very quickly, but I think the period of geopolitical chaos that we're in is going to also completely change the relationship between religion and the secular, which we're already seeing. It's happening in a big way in America, and it's going to filter in to the rest of the world as well. Again, I don't have a crystal ball to say where it will go, but keep watching that space because it's changing rapidly. And the knowledge system, which was ardently secular, it may have to become something else, okay?
That is very, very interesting. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to the three gentlemen who are going to give us a little bit of a discussion about what they heard. If I could ask them to all come up in front and please have a seat. We have Surabji, we have Arvind-Ji, and we have Jasdev-Ji. If the three of you could please come in front and have a seat. They're going to give us a 5-minute discourse each on their thoughts on what they heard. I'm going to wave at you in a very, very animated fashion when we hit your 5 minutes, just to make sure people can get away of time. So please, apologies in advance if I start to wave at you in your 5 minutes, but to try to keep you on time, that would be great. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Dr. Jasdev, we're going to kick us off.
Okay. I think I've known Arvind-Pal for a long time, and I really admire your work. I think your book is the first one that makes sense in our world at this moment. Let me have a few questions. One, I know you talk about Pax Americana. I don't quite see it that way. I think Pax Americana was essentially colonialism continuing by putting America at the front. You see, we Sardars are very prone to that. We are told... Okay. Okay. We are often told, is that better? Yes. We're often told, Sardar ji thappi maar ke, tusi mure hovo te, tusi takade ho te, Sardar ji always do shaheedis and then Sardar ji's get nothing at the end. And I think Europe, for a long time, was doing that to America, and the United States has finally woken up to that. It's interesting, in his first term, Trump said, we are no longer in the business of making the rest of the world in our image. And Europe was having convulsions on that, because Europe's whole agenda is always about evangelism and converting others into its own image. And I think it's interesting how he's kicked Europe away. Yeah? But I don't think I think Pax Americana is going to start now, because I think America is coming in its own. I can't see any other philosophy challenging it. I see China, but Chinese haven't got any original concepts. I see them at the UN, nothing original. Hindus, the very word Hindu is an exonym given to India by the Arabs and then by the British, so they don't have anything original to say to the world. Okay? They can go on about yoga and dharma and things like that, but there's nothing coming out that resolves our problems. Islam has been very interesting in that it has simply refused to secularize. Yeah? And there is, then within this six, I don't really see many thinkers. And one of the interesting things about the six is, take from 1920s until now, there's not been a single lawyer, a single thinker, a single intellectual, a single philosopher leading the six. All movements are led by lawyers and thinkers. I don't know where they are. So ordinary people lead the six. Yeah? So where is all this academia and the lawyers, etc.? I don't know, because probably they don't know how to break the walls. Yeah? Secondly, the word spiritual, I don't understand the word spiritual, quite frankly. Okay, I think it was a development from when Christendom fell and the word religion came into existence, and they sort of retreated into this concept of spiritual. Okay? What does the word spiritual? Anybody can become spiritual, because you can't assess somebody whether they are really spiritual or not spiritual. It's a nice sort of cop-out when you don't want to get into a proper debate. Thirdly, I think you're very valid on the whole thing about secularism. I am not convinced that the six are, the six have been sort of just fitting into things. A lot of the interpretations of the six are very much humanism developed into society. The words have words like equality, we believe in human rights, we believe in this, we believe in democracy. These words have been produced by secular humanism, taken on by Protestants. Where is the originality in that? I don't know. Fitting in words from saying, oh, we also believe in this, then the world asks, well, what were you doing for 500 years? Why have you not had any influence? So I do wait to see whether there are going to be thinkers who are going to break these barriers. And I do believe Gurmat has the solutions for a world in chaos, but I'm not sure whether there are six who are interpreting, and their interpretations have been very much, as you say, in the colonial paradigm, and will they come out of that or not? I don't know.
Thank you. Maybe 5 minutes or 3 minutes? 5? Okay. Stand and do this properly. Force it in. There we go. Okay. Naale farke rakh lavange. Okay, so firstly, thank you very much to Professor Mandair for what was a very difficult topic to cover in such a short space of time, but who still succinctly managed to do so very well, providing us with lots and lots of pointers and links as to different writers and thinkers and things that we can go and further look at and try and see the roadmap to how this has transpired and got us to here, and how it's going to proceed. Whether one wants to have the intellectual discourse, and Dr. Rai raised some sensible points on that, but it provides a roadmap and goes from there. For me, one of the parts that really stood out was, थोड़ा मैं पंजाबी जी नाल करांगा कि अपने जो तुसी रख लो डॉक्टर गुरभगत सिंह ने ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਵਿੱਦਿਆ ਕਿਸੇ ਲੈਵਲ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਲਿਓ, ਡਾਕਟਰ ਗੁਰਭਗਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇਮੀਡੀਏਟਲੀ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਯੂ ਹੈਵ ਟੂ ਰੀਡ ਦਿਸ ਵਰਕ ਐਂਡ ਯੂ ਹੈਵ ਟੂ ਅੰਡਰਸਟੈਂਡ ਇਟ। ਪਹਿਲੀ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਐਡੀ ਆ, ਦੂਜੀ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਣਾ ਤਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਡੂੰਘਾ ਆ। ਇਟਸ ਵੈਰੀ ਵੈਰੀ ਡਿਫਿਕਲਟ, and that's one of the reasons why we're finding, I think, that there is a lack of people who want to enter into this sphere, because they are afraid immediately when they are born and raised in a Sikh background, to actually go into this space. One of the other parts of that where you find people who are willing to move into this space, particularly in diaspora, is, as you kind of identified, is that in English language and particularly in diaspora circles, everything is compartmentalized. So we have South Asian studies, and then you go through into Sikh studies through that. So you have to find a field like anthropology to get there in the first place. Not everybody is willing to do that or wanting to do that. And the time frame on it is incredible. It can be very, very lengthy. And again, in the middle of all of that, we're all trying to lead everyday lives in the practical every day, which makes it very, very difficult, particularly in my personal experience, for those people in our community in the West who want to go there, namely females, for whom, as this panel shows, we have a hard time bringing forward to speak. And not just speak, but to actually participate, particularly in the academy. So I have a sister who is a PhD, and I have a wife who is a 2 times master's. And both of them are now in their mid-40s by the time they are able to try and explore what they really wanted to do, which is Sikh studies. But it's only after they've done something that was a career pathway, because this is the way that we are brought up. And so it brought into sharp focus the way that Professor Mandair concluded, and unfortunately we ran so close on time. That's the bit that for me would have been phenomenal for us to explore further, or on another trip or virtually, is how this connection between Gurdwara and academy is going to take place. And then secondly, how this kind of learning and this kind of ideology is going to filter into the everyday. Because for all of the great and good of the Singh Sabha thinkers who were phenomenal, the Sikyuni bacha ke rakhti si, nahi ta aapa aj nahi si itthe baithe hona, which was wonderfully coming through in your roadmap and showcasing that. Professor Sher Singh nu kisi kisi bande ne parna. And to take from Professor Sher Singh here to Arm Sangat is the connection that we want to have. Koi berla kathawachik ajra e karda ya. And Sant Singh Maskeen was phenomenal at it. But finding more Sant Singh Maskeens is the task we need to have to get to that stage. So thank you very much for the talk. It was very much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Arvind. I have a disclaimer to begin with that, first of all, I am completely ignorant of Sikh studies, Sikh philosophy, Sikh theory, Sikhi. So please, my comments are going to be more in relation to my own work, which is, I'm also an academic, by the way, so please forgive me if I throw more jargon at you or more concepts at you. I am guilty of that. I teach sustainability at University of Sussex. My name is Saurabh, and it's an honor to be here and to give some comments to Arvind's talk. Firstly, of course, I start with a disagreement. You know, academics love disagreement, so we have to start. I disagree that there is a geopolitical change happening in the world with the attack on Iran that we've seen since the 13th of June. It's the West once again ganging up in a very colonial way, as was just rightly pointed out, against a brown or a black country. And they will not stop until they've destroyed it to a significant extent. So I think the colonial order is being reproduced. There is no new geopolitical order to speak of as we speak right now. Very, very unfortunately. I wish you were right, though. Second point, modern, for me, of course, and as Arvind rightly pointed out, modernity is not just an era. The modern is actually a formation. It's actually the world in which we all live, the world that allows us to live in this particular technologized way. So if we think of the modern as a world, it has always emerged out of relations between the West and many, many indigenous societies, many, many indigenous cultures, worlds around the world. And if, in that respect, if you think of the modern, it has always been transmodern. And in fact, there is a concept called transmodernity since the 1990s, mid-1990s, from a Mexican-Argentinian philosopher called Enrique Dussel, whom I'm sure Arvind is familiar with. And he actually said, we can't talk about modern without talking about its colonial dimensions. So therefore, the world in which we live today is colonial modernity, and it has always been transmodern. And that's also my work. By the way, I work on that concept as well, colonial modernity in relation to sustainability. And in that world, obviously, it's a very important question to ask, what is sovereignty of concepts? Yeah, what does it really mean? Can there be a sovereignty of concepts when we are surrounded by colonial relations? What does it look like? And obviously, our response historically has been one of nationalism. It's a knee-jerk response. We always respond with nationalism. Hindus respond with nationalism and everybody else too around the world. Now, and I think a more decolonial response, a more anti-colonial response to this modern predomination, the modern prevalence of categories and borders, and of course borders are hardened when we go to nationalism, is to prioritize privilege foreground relations. And what do I mean by that? I'll be very, very brief. I know I'm probably out of time. So when we make relations central, and these are relations of all kind, relations not just relations of love or care, which are very, very important, but also relations of domination and control. We can actually see beyond simply race as well, beyond the West and the rest. We start saying caste in India, relations of caste. In India, we can't really talk about anything without talking about caste, in my view. It's such an overwhelming force, such an overwhelming structure that shapes everyday life. I am from Amritsar. I grew up there, so I have seen caste all around me growing up. And obviously gender, obviously patriarchy, which is also a reason why 4 male speakers perhaps are occupying the podium here today. Now, the relational turn that I'm trying to call for will highlight caste and gender alongside race. That relational will mean that we do not take borders as starting points. We do not take borders between what is internal and what is external and try to find harmony between them. In fact, we start out of relations. Relations of all kinds, again, relations across multiple cultures, relations between worlds, relations out of which we arise together. And this relational turn means that we also recognize selfhood, self-realization as relational, meaning that we nurture capacities to discern. And when we talk about selfhood, we want to be able to nurture children's, young people's capacity to discern what are good relations from what are colonial relations, what are oppressive relations, so that they can allow themselves to be formed by these good relations more than they are already being formed by the oppressive ones. And this brings me to my final proposal, that the move away from modernity, or rather, as I call it, colonial modernity, is not too transmodern, is in fact because modernity has been transmodern. It has always transcended borders of all kind in order to appropriate, extract, and assimilate throughout the last 500 years. Simply put, it is a transformation or a transition, a move away from the modern to what we might call the pluriverse. Now, what is the pluriverse? Simply put, it is the world of many worlds in which there is no single way of living that is prioritized or foregrounded, in which there are many ways of living and many ways of knowing and many ways of being and becoming. And in that sense, I would argue that many worlds are also central to Sikhism, Sikh philosophy, Sikhi, to Punjab, for sure, to India, to South Asia, and indeed to the planet. So embracing this pluriversal philosophy, this pluriversal idea, means that we bring the spiritual and symbolic together with the practical and the material and the epistemic. Because if we don't do that, what we are doing is essentially our futures, we're leaving them over to the modern world to colonize. And it will continue to do that unless we bring our own ways of knowing to the fore, our own techniques and technologies, our own roti, kapda, and makan to the fore. Because otherwise, our roti and its production, like with the Green Revolution, our kapdas by the power loom and our makans by the concrete and bricks are going to be taken over by the modern world, as it has been happening for the last 100 or so years. So I leave it there. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and it's an honor to be here and a pleasure to contribute. I look forward to further discussion.
Thank you very much. Can we just thank our three panel members who've given us their views? Thank you so much, gentlemen. And now, Dr. Mandair, back to you. Three very different views from gentlemen, and get your questions ready. I don't know how long we have, but let's kick off with the questions. Do you want to say something first?
I can respond briefly. Thank you to the respondents, the discussants. I really appreciate all of you doing this at such short notice. It's really, really helpful. Quick response to Saurabh's idea about the transmodern. The transmodern, in the way that I was putting it in that slide, is the pluriverse, basically. That's how I envisage it. So I don't see any issue there at all. And I think we're on the same wavelength with that. It's just a term that I use in a strategic way, but it's defined through the heteronymous self that is internally plural, because you've got to begin pluralism with the pluralization of the self, the internal world. To Dr. Rai, the term spiritual, again, it's a strategic move that's made to move away from discourse that's dominated by the idea of a monotheistic God, to allow the idea of the self as central and the transformation of the self. That's really how I would use the word spiritual, and I think this is the move that many thinkers have made over the years, primarily from Christianity, but it also works really well. And of course, this is English language that we're still working within. And within the English language, it's still, the word spiritual can be interpreted in many, many different ways, politically as well. So it's a very wide term. To Harinder, where is he? Thank you for those comments. I definitely think that the last two slides are the most important. There's an entire lecture on that, and I'm happy to actually stream that at some stage, because that's all about the academy and the academy and the Gurdwara, which I've been going on and on about for 2.5 decades. We actually started something like this at Coventry University in 1998. It was a BA in Sikh Studies, and lasted 2 years. We got funding from European Commission, and within 2 years, the leadership of the local Sikh community had destroyed any possibility of us going forward, because they saw it as a threat. And that's been the history of what we've been trying to do, basically. So I have to say that, but it's been a working in the making for absolutely ages. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Shall we start with the questions? I can see a hand up in the front over here first, and oh my goodness, okay.
And if we could have questions rather than monologues, basically,
yes,
it'd be helpful.
That's a good point. Let's keep them tight, please.
How can we have a institute in England or in America where the Gurdwaras join in, or maybe a Gurdwara's initiative to set up an institute that teaches grantees and people who are going to be our leaders in the Gurdwaras, not just somebody who does so-and-so, somebody who does Nitinem, and somebody maybe does a task. I mean, that's the bottom concept.
Right.
They need to be very intelligent people, like people in the Christian churches. They will answer you questions. They are academics in most of the churches.
Yeah.
And we want educated people in the Gurdwaras, not just do the normal Abbas and everything, but
Okay, I think we've got your question. So shall we stop there?
Very quickly, and if I start going on this, it's going to be a monologue for about half an hour. So I'm going to just say that this is a work in progress. This is something that is going on in Canada in a very big way, in the US, and I'm sure there's massive potential in this country now for tying up colleges, higher education with the Gurdwara system. There's absolutely no reason why it should not be done, even if it's done in an online fashion, connected to sort of in-person work. This is the thing that I'm trying to play with at the University of Michigan, where we have this residential masterclass for training people who want to teach. So I'll just give you an example of how this has worked where I'm living. So when my book came out 2 years ago, members of my local Sangat created a Gurbani Vichar group. And there's about 30 members in that group. They read the book cover to cover about 3 times, and they've had online meetings with me. And now I've let them into my accredited courses. So they come in, and their whole aim, most of them are businessmen, they're doctors, they're lawyers, etc., very, very established people who are still in their jobs. But they also want to teach at a very crucial level to a younger audience. So they're in direct contact with me through that residential course as well. That's one very, very quick way in which this can be done, but ultimately you need institutional support from Gurdwaras and the desire to actually be talking to universities, in a productive way. So I can't give you a mechanism for that. That's a different lecture I'd have to do, but I did point out what the basic problems are. If we understand how the university works, you can go in and have a more productive dialogue. If you don't understand how it works and what are the obstacles, then we're going to get into all sorts of, roadblocks, basically. But the potential is there, so that I will end there.
Professor Mandair, you have very well what a Sikh philosophy documentary. And different time,
Call nu kar lo.
at different time, different questions have written books on that basis. You have said what a philosophy 1, 2, and 3. And for the last 70 years, I have not seen any change in that philosophy being seen at the ground level in Gurdwaras. This is academic only. In the books we have mentioned, he wrote this book, he wrote that book, and he wrote that. So there is no linkage in university researches and the, being followed at the Gurdwara level. Because I'm 78, when I started going to Gurdwara, I don't find any my friends how begin pursue the youngsters. The youngster can bring the change more because we want to bring. But unfortunately, all our Giani or Gurdwara employees are very, very low paid. Most of them are paid less than minimum wages. Why the people will choose to become the Giani if there is no future in them? So we have to think, because you speak very books are scholars are getting very good, but what is the implementation? To my mind, it is zero. You have to do this.
Good. I'm not sure whether I've already answered this, but I think that, this is something that it's not just up to us, I think, as academics to do. It's the institutional support as well that's absolutely crucial. And the biggest barrier is we don't value intellectuals, unfortunately. And I'm sorry to say that. But we think that intellectuality is going to destroy the Panth, whereas it's actually going to help if we're open to that. Give you an example. When I first started running small youth groups in my local Gurdwara in Coventry, they basically threw me out, saying that intellectual aa gaya inna sanu nyane nu kharab kar dena, and that barrier is still there, basically, which is what I'm hearing from the audience here. And I think this has to be tackled from the top of the Sikh institutions as well as from academics. I think a lot of academics are actually willing and will be willing to, come halfway into this. I'm going to give it to.
Hi, thank you so much for your very extensive scholarly works and for putting it in such a succinct manner. I've often talked to the Sikh Sangha here in the Gurdwaras, and I also come from a legal environment, and if I use that concept that the law is a language within a language, so my proposal is that very high level intellectual the concepts and the philosophy and all the things that you've set out, my request would be to simplify it, to make it accessible to the Sangha, because a lot of the young people which you rightly pointed out, there is a huge disconnect between the Gurdwara and what the Gurdwara is about and the youngsters. They can't relate to the fact that they live in here or in the US. They speak primarily English, and the Gurdwara environment is primarily Punjabi. And there needs to be some kind of, one, creating access, two, creating bridges, and three, finding ways that all of the learning that you put together is to promote it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it speaks to the whole question about diasporic realism, that I think we have to question why Punjabi is the only language that's taught in the Gurdwaras, and understand that our kids are primarily, their brain processes work through English, right? That doesn't mean you stop teaching Punjabi, but there has to be a correspondence between both. These are long issues to talk about, and I think rather than trying to address it now, I think I would like to give a different lecture on hitting the nail on the head. And I think I can do that with the permission of whoever is in charge, basically, Dr. Gorja, etc. Maybe an online sort of lecture, etc. Because I think the mechanisms are there, and we're trying to work these things out. But there needs to be rapprochement between both sides, that we have to get somewhere, and etc. etc. Jazz had a question. There was another person. Oh, there was a.
Thank you. You said that we need to redefine Sikh philosophy on our own terms and expand on that individually. So I'm asking the question, how would you sort of develop this on your own terms? Which you also spoke about being theoretically adept. And when you go to university and you learn philosophy, you often learn about Rousseau, Locke, Kant. So when you have an interest in that space, you're sort of forced into that Western mind frame in terms of thinking about philosophy. So if you could expand on how we develop this in our own terms, that'd be great.
That's a lovely question. It goes to the heart of what I do. And doing philosophy, Sikh philosophy on your own terms and talking about Gurmat concepts on your own terms means essentially doing what Sher Singh was doing. Remember that slide I showed, where he was aware that I'm not just talking about Sikh concepts, but they're now, in my mind, in contact with a Western concept as well. Doing it on its own terms means being, first of all, in tune with the rhythms of indigenous discourse with Gurmat. If you can't do that, and if you don't live that discourse, you cannot create a kind of an intellectual or even kind of a psychic or existential connection between different cultures. Doing it on your own terms essentially means allowing yourself to play with what Deleuze would call planes of encounter, using yourself and experimenting with those kind of planes of encounter. I've talked about that in the book a little bit, but I'm talking about it much more in a book that's going to come out. That means if you're able to be in touch with that, you can have a philosophy department throw any number of discourses, Rousseau, Kant, Hegel at you, but you're still grounded in your own sort of discourse. And as long as you have a foothold there, you should be able to work out relationships between them. And the key point being relationships. How do you work out a relationship that is sustainable? It might not work in the external world, but if it works in your mind, right? If you can have a relationship between them in your mind in which the two are equal or both have something to say, that can be expressed in writing, etc. So I think there are ways around this. I've played with this concept in my first book, Religion in the Spectrum of the West. That's what the whole thing is about. So you may want to kind of to look at that, and other people as well. There's an entire field of study called global philosophies, which is having a hard time holding its own against mainstream Western philosophy, but it's coming up, and I think Sikh studies can be part of that movement as well. So you have to look for those movements. It's a strategic thing. I'm not saying it's easy at all. I had to fight through the system in the 90s. Luckily, my Punjabi was good, and I think some linguistic development always helped, as well as keeping a lived connection to your own indigenous tradition. And if you have that, you can negotiate in much better terms. Hope that helps. Jazz.
Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed your talk, so thank you very much. The question I wanted to ask was the way that Brahmanism has influenced Sikh philosophy, and does that indicate the persistence of caste in Sikh practice? And what ways is Sikh philosophy emerging to disrupt the kind of persistence of caste? So that's one question. The other question is very much linked to that. It's around some traditions, like caste, are very oppressive. What other things do you think are really important in Sikh philosophy that comes and meets a contradiction, which is very oppressive, to transform it?
I think it all goes down to the philosophy of oneness. The Mool Mantra basically says it all. You don't need to go much further. The idea of oneness as completely all-encompassing, but a oneness that destroys yourself. If you can destroy yourself and able to rebuild it, that's the mechanism for caste destruction, for annihilating caste, as Ambedkar would say, basically. That is why he chose Buddhism, because Buddhism was finely tuned to these philosophies, and Buddhism was also a threat to Brahmanical Hinduism as well, right? Simply because it targeted the self. And that's what Gurmat does as well. So I think if Sikhs are allowed to access the power of Gurmat, it is all about self-transformation. And that self-transformation has huge implications for social structure. It begins with psychic redevelopment. That psychic redevelopment develops societies and societal relationships in different ways, and along with that, relationships to the environment. Again, all to do with the philosophy of oneness. Why do we still have caste? I think it's embedded into cultural frameworks, into cultural ethnic frameworks that, yes, are primarily coming from Brahmanic sources, but are so deep and so long-lived that it's going to take much more than just a philosophy to outdo them. A philosophy will help enormously. And so this is where diasporic realism comes in. I think people in diaspora have to think, what are we replicating? Are we replicating Punjabiyat? What does Punjabiyat mean? Okay, is it worth replicating that? Or can you do something different in a new environment? So I teach a course called, I'm going to teach it again in fall, called Race, Caste, Religion in the USA and India. Basically, it connects caste to race to religion. The three are intricately connected. And the two places where these are fostered the most is India and the US. And there's something linking India and the US in the way that Americans have treated slaves, and there's a kind of a caste ideology coming out of the post-slave movement, etc., which filters down into the networks today. And it's very similar to the anti-caste movements that are going on in India today. And I think we need to connect all the dots rather than isolating, just caste in India, etc. This is now a global phenomenon, etc., that we need to kind of hit on the head if possible. Long question to answer. Sorry, I can't go much further than that now, but lots to talk about there.
So on that note, last two questions, because I know we've run out of time. So we've got two last questions, and then, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know, Dr. Mandair, whether you can hang around to speak to people, but just trying to keep...
I'll be looking for water.
So second last question.
The question I had was, insights and complexity of Sikh philosophy, like your work, be systemized and automated or even coded as a form of governance to make it accessible and usable without requiring years of academic study. Also, it is in line with the recent development at MIT, the self-improving AI, and also having a governance that is independent of the framework that Western tradition gave.
Okay, very interesting. I would be very, very cautious, very wary about systematizing Sikh philosophy. I think its impulse should be creative rather than to reduce it to bite-sized things. That can work for educating youngsters and people who are completely new to the thing. That's absolutely fine, and maybe AI can help there. But I'm seeing Sikh philosophy as a form and a vehicle for experimentation, right? In the way that the very early Singh Sabha were doing, experimenting with this new environment, this completely new environment. And I think we're in that new environment as well. So my thing would be caution to reducing it to something very, very simple. We've already reduced Sikhi to something very simple. And unfortunately, people have stopped thinking and stopped wanting to change as well because they think, oh, that's it. That's so simple. I've done it. I'm a good Sikh, etc., etc. So yeah, the essence is be careful of that. Also, I remembered, I've got to answer your thing about geopolitical order. What I'm trying to emphasize is not the continuity of geopolitical order, but chaos. It was geopolitical chaos, essentially, that I'm trying to get across. Yes, and that renewed Occidentalism is precisely the replication of the old order. But at the same time, the cat is out of the bag. And I think that whatever justification the previous orders have had to remain at the top, that justification is disappearing. People can see through it straight away. And I think it's the perfect time. That period of chaos, I think, is really productive. And the way I think about chaos is coming out of a reading of the Rag Maru hymn. It's a beautiful hymn by Guru Nanak on creation. And he talks about chaos prior to the creation of the world. And there's this really interesting connection between formlessness and then form as it comes in. It's never a one-time thing. It doesn't happen once. It's constantly replicated in each moment that we're living. And so that chaos, to me, is a time for productive connection making, for productive thinking, productive activity, rather than saying, oh, it's a new political order that's being established. I'm not saying that, but it was. I'm glad you actually brought me to that. Sorry, one more question? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. The intellectualism and movement, the synergy needs to be there. And recently I've been looking at Mool Mantra. Two questions on Mool Mantra. One, is it the ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗੁਣ ਨੇ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਦੇ ਉਹ ਮੂਲ ਮੰਤਰ ਹੈ। ਦੂਸਰਾ, ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਸਟਾਰਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਵਿਦ ਨਿਊਮਰਲ 1, ਨੋ the short, why did he use the numeral 1? And secondly, Gurprasad, what does it mean in your understanding?
Don't get me started on this. That's what the whole book is about. You're going to get me end up replicating the whole thing. It's actually in chapter 2. I'll just answer the numeral 1 question for now. But the idea of the numeral 1 was to differentiate it from the word, but it is not just a number. It is actually, it is naming a quality of vibration, a quality of nad as anhad nad, basically. It's a quality of vibration. It's quality, it's not just a number amongst other numbers. And I think this is where we've got mixed up. it's a quality of being. It's a quality of being as pure oneness, basically, and it's something that everybody shares and can share. If it was just a numerical one, it would be reducible to intellectuality, and that becomes problematic. So I think that, and remember, Onkar is that rhythm, is that vibration that is emanating. So in that vibration, everything remains one, despite the fact that it becomes multiple or unlimited times, it still remains one. And what remains one is that initial impulse. So, and that's a spiritual definition rather than a religious or theological one. But anyway, a lot to do here. That's how I for there.
It's a simple question. You want to answer it, you also don't answer. What's your thought about Khalsa?
I'm too tired to even answer that, so.
You're out, Khalsa.
Okay, I am very grateful for all of you. Guruji's hukam, and the hukam raza, and I'll just add one note when, remember, it takes me to A-level chemistry. Looking back, entropy in Nirgun Sargun, in that hukam raza. But anyway, that's a further thought. But again, can we have appreciation for Arvind-Pal? For all of you, we didn't know it was going to be there, but you have been wonderful, and that is because of the engagement. What a wonderful speaker that we've had, and we're running these with the, shall we say, with the blessings of the executive committee and the committee wallows, so as you know. So I'm one of them, although I may be considered as a professional or intellectual, but I think, okay, so let's try and get together, let's join together, and the concept of love, Shabbat, and that is what we want to espouse. And I'm so grateful, a lot of young people who are here. If you become and you challenge us, you say, but this is what we're going to do, but also join us, because we're all together in this. And let me say to you, being a committee wala is not easy. It's actually very difficult. Okay, because we are the subject of a lot of things and accusations which may be there, but anyway, it's those committee members who've been able to facilitate this, and we're again very grateful. Now, Arvind-Pal is going to be sitting out, but we've also got some books here of the Sikh philosophy. If anybody wants them, we're very happy. If you're able to make a donation.